He's Howard Eibach, a former copywriter and creative director and the author of 2 books on the creative brief.
And he's Henry Gomez, an ad agency strategist with 28 years of experience. And together, he and I are the Brief Brothers. We love talking about creative briefs, briefing, and advertising. Henry, we're back with another episode. Today, we have resumed our series talking to recent graduates from advertising programs. This one is from SCA, our friend Mark Lewis's School of Communication Arts in London. We are going to be talking to Anna Clayton and Hope Whitehead. Let's join the conversation. We are back with another episode, Henry, and today we have a continuation of a series that we started some time ago by talking with recent graduates from our friend Mark Lewis's School of Communication Arts in London. And this time we have Hope Whitehead and her partner, Anna Clayton. Hope is the copywriter. Anna is the art director. I got that right?
Yeah.
All right. So they have recently within the last year or so, you've left the confines of SCA. Would that be a good assessment?
July, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, that's
so
July.
less than a year ago. So Hope and Anna, welcome to the Brief Brothers. We're delighted to have you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Okay, they are talking to us today from London. So the time frame is a little different for us. We like to do a little exploration of our guests to find out what got you into advertising, what drew you into advertising. How did you find your way to the School of Communication Arts, which has a rather esteemed reputation? So I'm guessing it wasn't easy to get in. I'm pretty sure that Mark set some high bars for you to get in. So what was your progress? How did you find your way to advertising? How did you get to SCA? And I'm going to guess that you met while you were students there, and that's how you formed your partnership. So tell us a little bit about how you got started.
He wants to go first.
You go.
Hope, why
Anna.
don't you start, Hope?
Yeah, sure. So I have pretty much, I think I'm one of the lucky ones. I've kind of known about advertising as a career my whole life. My family's kind of been in advertising. So my granddad, my uncle, my mum, my cousin, all kind of in really, like, unfortunately from a nepotism standpoint, very unhelpful ways. But they've been in the industry. So I knew about it, and I actually really didn't want to do it because of that. But I actually ended up, so I did uni and things. I'm originally from New Zealand, and ended up coming to England for uni, and thought I was kind of going to do the academic thing, and write like really long essays forever. But actually, after I finished my undergrad, I got a job with a small branding studio. And I found out that you can get money for writing really short pieces of writing. So that kind of appealed to my nature.
I sympathize. You're muted, Henry. I sympathize with that because I just published a memoir, and I make more money on my copywriting than I'm doing on the memoir, which is about 70,000 words. So I understand what you're talking about.
Long pieces, no money. Short pieces, money.
Yeah, pretty much. I wish that I had not gone back. Went back and did a master's, and I really wish that I'd learned that kind of before I did that. That's quite a lot of words that I paid to write.
That said, I think one of the things that Howard and I always talk about with people, particularly we find in advertising, that a lot of people back into this career. They don't necessarily plan to go into it. And that world experience matters, right? Like being out there in the world, and maybe the masters didn't directly contribute to your copywriting, but somehow it helps. And just like any kind of real world experience. You mentioned that you had family in advertising, and that was the reason you didn't want to get into it. Well, my dad is a doctor, and I didn't want to get into that. That's how I got into advertising.
Yeah.
So that worked for you.
Yeah, we had a guest just a week or so ago, Sherry Horowitz, who's calls herself the AI conjurer. She's extraordinarily talented, and her background is poetry. So it's interesting, as Henry said, we take circuitous routes, and you took a direct route. Whatever gets you there.
No, exactly. Yeah. And I was quite resistant to it. And I guess working in branding and sort of marketing, you get into just writing, and the more that we did sort of ideas and things like that, the more that got me excited. So we had a PR kind of wing to the, there were 10 of us. It was one person, that was the wing. But you know, that was the really exciting stuff for me. So they unfortunately shut down due to COVID, or they sort of restructured their business. And my uncle said, you know, there's two ways to get into advertising. There's the easy way, which is ad school. Then there's the hard way, which is just trying to do it. So I Googled ad schools London, and that's how I found the SCA. Pretty good on the SEO.
Are there competitors? I mean, I haven't even explored the world of schools, advertising schools in London. I know a few here. Are there a number to choose from, or is SCA like the one?
So it depends what you're looking for. In terms of advertising, like studying advertising, you can do it at uni and a few unis around here. And that would be like a 3-year course, or you could do a 1-year master's. I was looking at SEO because it's a vocational course. You know, it's not, and I didn't want to do more university. I was kind of over it at that point. And so in terms of that, there's really, the SEO is the only one that stands alone. Outside of that, there's stuff that's run out of different agencies. So there was the Watford course, which then became BBH Barn, and things like that. And then after that, it's really just placement. There's not a lot of great ads. I mean, I went for SCA just because, you know, it had the industry links. I didn't have to write essays. And genuinely, like, you connect with the sponsor agencies from day one almost. You know, you're meeting those people. So
I
I think,
recall the conversation with Ro and Jess, and they said they were working on briefs right from the beginning.
yeah,
Yeah,
live.
I think from like fourth or fifth week, you have agencies coming in and actually giving you live briefs, and so your ideas that you pitch back to them could actually be made within like the first couple of weeks of the course. So it's great experience. Obviously, you're not great at that point, so
Well,
unlikely.
Anna, why don't you give us a little snippet of how you found your way to SCA, and then we can kind of talk about your experience at SCA.
Yeah, for sure. I didn't know it was really an industry as such, which always sounds a bit silly to say because obviously advertising exists and everyone knows that. But I feel like you don't know there's a job that is literally like job title is a creative. So I didn't know that really existed, and I was always really into art at school, like really loved fine art. But I was always quite academic, so I was really good at English as well. And I think I got kind of pushed by my school. I went to like very academic schools and got quite pushed into academia. So I always knew I wanted to do something with art, but I ended up going and doing English and art history at uni, because just that was the way. So I don't really know ad school was a thing at this point. And then I got a job after uni in marketing for like a year, and then I was kind of really missing like art and having art in my life. So I did more research and I messaged a guy on LinkedIn who was in the industry. I literally just looked up a guy who made an ad that I liked, and he just sent me SCA. So he told me to go to ad school, and that's how you get into the industry. So I just did that and then applied for SCA, got in, and then yeah, the rest is history.
So now, did you have a conversation with this gentleman, or?
No, I literally just messaged him and sent him a message on LinkedIn. I think he'd won a few awards, so I just did a bit of research, sent this guy a message, and he just sent me like, he basically told me that you need a portfolio, so you can't get into the industry with a CV. And obviously all I had was a CV. I didn't have any work or anything. So I applied, and then yeah, because obviously portfolio school gets you that portfolio. So I wanted that instead of doing like a master's, which doesn't help you in quite the same way that SCA does. And then yeah.
I wanted to add on to what you said because I found it to be very true in my life, is that civilian people that don't work in this industry, right? They have very little knowledge of what goes on in the advertising industry. They're aware of advertising exactly as you say, but I, for one, and I've told my story many times, a buddy of mine, I had gone through some personal issues very early after finishing university. I had had my own business and it failed, and I had an illness that took me out of the workforce for about a year, year and a half. And I was going to become a teacher. And a buddy of mine asked me what I was doing, and I was waiting to interview with schools for teaching gigs. And he said, well, come join me at the ad agency temporarily. And I had never contemplated before what went on inside an ad agency. So I find that it is hard to kind of explain to people. And I'm a strategist, which makes it even harder, because at least you could say, well, I write the, what they say, or I do the artwork in the commercial. Like, I'm a strategist. Like, how do I explain what I do to somebody who has really, you think about other industries, like I tell you, automobile industry, you kind of think of a factory with people working on it and engineers with drawings, and you think of a bank and you think of tellers and people in suits. But in advertising, it's just like these pop culture depictions is really the only thing.
Yeah.
And before Mad Men, there really weren't even that many pop culture depictions of advertising. So it's
I
to me,
think,
it's always been interesting.
yeah, I think the hardest thing to describe to people, and something I had no idea about, is the whole partnership thing. It's like the only industry that works in this way, where you have to have a partner to really get a job. I've not heard of any other job like that. And so it's always a weird one to explain to your friends when you're talking about your partner, because they either think you're two-timing on your partner, or it's a bit of a
That's
difficult one to explain.
That's a really interesting observation. I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah, if you're an accountant, or if you're a plumber, or if you're a carpenter, or a banker, you pretty much are on your own. You have colleagues, clearly you have colleagues, and there might be 4 or 5 plumbers that you work with, but it is unique. And I love pointing out when I teach a workshop, that it wasn't until what, 1940s, 1950s, when Bill Bernbach had this brainstorm and said, we can't have the copyright over here and the art director over here. We got to put them together and create a team, which we look back on now and say, well, duh. Whereas Homer
Yeah,
Simpson
it
would say,
feels
doh.
it feels very natural now to
Yeah,
have an art director. But back in the old days, and you guys may not even know, back in the old days, really the copywriters were the creatives, and the art directors basically were fulfilling orders. They were
order
like, okay,
takers.
I need you to draw this. And they would draw it, and that was it. And it wasn't the collaboration and it was in the late 50s, early 60s, that Bill Bernbach created this team approach of, the art isn't gonna be pushed to the second stage. We're gonna have these people thinking together, because frankly, if you look, and I think that was a big part of the creative revolution,
Yeah,
was the art direction of the ads of DDB at the time was very different than the art direction of every other ad agency, and was kind of what ushered in this visual language that, you know, to your point about long copy, you were talking about essays, but Howard and I have had episodes. We've talked about, the long copy advertising that existed before the creative revolution, and even in the beginning of it, to the kind of, single sentence, one word, no word copy that we have now. It's much more of a visual medium. So that was definitely a turning point, I think, in the history of advertising. But you do bring up an interesting point that, I mean, obviously you can get hired individually as a copywriter or an art director. But if you're young and you don't have any experience, but you have a teammate that you've done work with, it can be a benefit to an employer to say, hey, let's pick up these two. They know each other, they work well together already. This is the work they've created together. I think that's definitely an advantage.
so Hope, you knew a little bit about the industry even before you got into it, but Anna was a little new for you. So what was this? What was it like to realize that you really needed to have a partner? Did that change your perception of what this industry was like for you?
Um, I think it makes ad school quite stressful, the whole like having to find a partner thing. So I'd say that. So from that perspective, it's a lot of pressure that you need to obviously be reliant on someone else for your career. So
I'm
that's always
visualizing like speed dating on in the first week of
it
classes.
honestly
Like, I gotta find a
was.
partner.
It was.
Yeah.
We think it should be like a, I don't know, a drama TV series, like keeping
Like
up
Love
with SEA.
Island, but
Yeah, it
worse.
really should be. It was the drama that happened, like partnerships broke up, people got back together. It's literally like a form of dating. So it's bizarre.
Yeah,
But
Henry has no concept what it's like because he's never had to partner. I mean, he does partner. He works with his creative director intimately, and that's a great symbiotic relationship. But it's not the same thing as having like me always having an art director partner. So
I've had
sorry.
I've had right hand strategists that report to me that I always bounce ideas off of and stuff like that. Right now I don't have one, but
Not
so
the same. Not the same, Henry.
on and off. Well, no, because when you're the boss, you're ultimately responsible. But
Right.
I do avail myself of other brains when I have them available.
But I understand. I mean, I didn't have knockdown, drag out fights with my art director partner. We had disagreements over a concept, and when I would disagree with my partner and I take a concept to the creative director, 9 times out of 10, my partner was right, and I shouldn't have gone with the idea. But that was the extent of it. It's just we just agreed over an idea. We weren't gonna, have a whole romantic kind of tiff. But I can see that, I know that kind of thing happens. So you were evolving into this new environment at SCA. You had to find a partner. What was it like in the early days?
Fraught. They basically put you into groups to work together for the first bit. So you're meeting everyone at once almost. And then you have to start working out who you want to work with in a two. And so almost the first bits, even though you don't know what you're doing, are kind of more stressful than the end bits when you're working to your deadlines for your portfolio, because you're constantly assessing others, assessing yourself, thinking, would I work with this person? Do they produce the kind of work that I would enjoy making as well? So yeah, it's really difficult, and you do you're constantly reassessing. Anna and I thought about pairing up quite early on, but then she had an identity crisis about being a copywriter.
So I came in as a copywriter and ended up following art direction. So yeah.
Any
That obviously
regrets?
changed my course of partners. No, not at all. I mean, no, I've always been very into art. I think I was kind of scared because I'm from quite an academic background. I was quite scared to kind of leap over into art, into the
And
art world.
it's not like at SCA, it's not a decision you take lightly to go to art direction. I think I realize I'm like speaking for you on this, Anna, but like as a copywriter who was so terrified on the sidelines of this, at SCA, the standards are so high for execution. You're expected to be very proficient across all the Adobe programs. And you do everything.
You're coming in, you're expected to be proficient. You're saying.
Yeah, I can believe
you're
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you're going to follow art direction, you are expected to, and I had no experience whatsoever, so I kind of taught myself Adobe. Ian became my best friend. Ian is the craft mentor, so I just sat with him for hours and just learned like all of Adobe. And now I feel pretty very confident with
So you
everything.
were at a significant disadvantage compared to the other art direction students who had done coursework or taken had practical experience with the tools, because
100%,
graphic design and art direction are different things, but you kind of got to know a bit about design to be an art director, right? And
yeah, absolutely, yeah. But I mean, the training at SEA is so good, so it is possible to do it in a year. So you just have to really knuckle down and work hard. So I did that, and it was fine. And yeah, very happy I did it, to be honest. But obviously, it's the benefits of being able to do copywriting as well. Yeah, so it's kind of worked in my favor.
I'm going to take a wild guess here and say that your academic interests, your desire to be a writer, probably gave you a grounding in some of the history of art and literature. So your academic, I'm going to say prowess, gave you the skills you needed to learn on the job. So I'm just looking at the two of you sitting here on screen without being in front of you as I would if I were teaching in person. You both exude a degree of confidence and comfort with each other. that is palpable. I can feel it even through the screen. So combined with what I know Mark Lewis's standards, because we've had a couple of conversations with him, and he's just a cool character. It's a pretty cool place to begin. I wish I had that kind of training when I was starting out, because I think, Hope, you said there's the easy way and the hard way. I went the hard way.
Same.
Yeah, it's like someone said to me, "You need a portfolio," and I said, "You mean pictures of me?" No. You need to have ads. Oh, okay. And how do I do that? I don't have an art director. Well, I learned how to do these stick figure things until I could find an art director, right? And then when you work with an art director, all of a sudden you start to develop your own aesthetic. I learned composition and framing and balance and color just by watching my art director do her thing. You just learn by osmosis.
Which
That's
is
the hard way.
which is another kind of like side benefit of the team system, which is that eventually, right, the title doesn't matter as much, right? Because the copywriter could come up with a visual idea, or the art director could come up with the verbal idea, or the line, or the headline, or the tagline, or whatever it is, because you're learning from each other and you're collaborating with each other. And that title, you're still going to be the expert in putting the comp together and how it should look, but it does ultimately become a team game, and it becomes about the idea, not necessarily breaking that idea into its separate components.
Right. And
But
I
yeah,
can't
I
tell you how
find-
many times my art director fixed a line that I wrote. It happens.
Another pair of eyes, you know?
Go ahead, Anna. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I think it's possible for two art directors to work together and two copywriters to work together, because at the end of the day, it's about what comes, like, coming up with a good idea together. And I think after that, you figure it out together. And you generally have knowledge of both. So I actually think it's possible.
The only downside, I would say, of the SCA is that it would be really hard for two copywriters to work together because the art craft standards are so high.
And actually, in industry, you have designers, actually.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's actually possible if two copywriters teamed up. That's actually possible.
Was there a moment? Was there a project or an assignment that you both were given when you realized, okay, we're a team now. We really do click?
When did it? I honestly can't really remember how it happened. Oh, it was D&AD, wasn't it? That's when we properly decided to partner up. I don't know if you know much about D&AD New Blood, but yeah, they
We've heard of it, yes.
It's a young creative competition.
Yeah. They take
D&AD
that
is one of the premier award shows.
And that's what SCA, I think, is massively known for as well. Like, we hear people from other unis saying we watch the SCA videos to prepare our entries because, again, those craft standards are the thing. But I think, we decided, we were like, well, we want to win. And not that we did, but and I think we both looked for someone who was strong across. I was certainly looking for someone, like, as a writer, I wanted an art director who could write, so that, like, you know, they can sense check you a little bit better than, you know, maybe if you're like trad art director and fully on like just pictures. You know, I wanted someone that had a little bit of the craft that I was interested in too, because I thought I could bring something to the table visually in terms of critique, not in terms of visualization necessarily.
The visual side of it as well. I think we like to work on our separate things because it's what we're most passionate about, but I think we're actually quite hybrid. Like, we have the skills to do both of us, so that worked.
It was, at the end of the day, it was work ethic that drew us together. I think we both saw someone that's really focused and really wanted to do a good job, get everything done, like be organized, which is a big ask, you know, in the creative sector. And I think that was what drew us together. And then we wrote this really terrible rap together.
Yeah, it was terrible.
And terrible what?
Rap. Tell us about the terrible rap.
So
I'm not sure I want to relive it.
Look at us. Probably your first impression isn't like great rappers. And actually, you'd be right. We sort of looked at the D&AD entries from years past and we thought, you know what wins? People who write like a silly little rap song to be, you know, instead of a voiceover in your case study film. Like, well, we've analyzed these very methodically and this seems to come out on top a lot of the time. And in the end, we actually paid someone to do the rap for us. But so that it sounded cool at the end. Like,
I think it was a pretty cool video, to be honest. I think we just
it's
got
an amazing video and it did this like amazing.
Now you're gonna have to send it to us so that we can
Yeah.
edit it in.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Please.
we've got to see it.
What I really want to see actually is all the drafts where, you know, we were still finalizing the script. So we wrapped it ourselves. and the way that they do D&AD at SCA is, you know, you watch everyone's videos, you know, you have every week and then it goes down to every second day, every day. You are watching each other's projects to see how they're progressing and you get feedback from the entire room pretty much. So almost every day we would have to play our homemade rap.
Oh God.
Oh my.
Can we just like edit this whole part out?
Yeah, right. No chance.
And you'll
No
never
chance.
find it. You'll never see it.
Okay. I mean, it's hard enough to just, you know, be focused to come up with the ideas for the project that you're working on. And now you've got this other layer on top of that, the daily review. My goodness.
Yeah, and they're not kind to you in that, you know, if it's bad, they will tell you it's bad and they won't sugarcoat it. So
and award submissions. I mean, like when you're like right now, I'm dealing with an award submission for a strategy award, and you know, it's painful because you have to, you know, you're taking time from your everyday work and to figure out like how's the best way to present this case. And it's funny that we're talking about like a voiceover. You used the rapper. Yesterday I got sent some demos of voiceover that we potentially would use in this case study video, and the VO, one of the VO artists talent was a guy that when I started my career 28 years ago, one of the first things I did was record a radio commercial with this guy as the VO. And so it was like, and I just had my 28th anniversary.
We got to get that, Henry. We got to get that.
Got to get what? Oh, that commercial?
Yeah.
No chance. It doesn't, the agency doesn't exist anymore. The client doesn't exist anymore.
a lot of like confidential information being discussed on this podcast today.
Yeah, I know. This is good stuff. So one of the things, as I mentioned to you before we hit the record button, we had another team from SCA whom you told us you knew, Ro and Jess, another art director, copywriter partner, and they were sharing with us when they were on. It's been about a year, I guess. That like you, they So I just dropped my pen, so I'm dropping off camera here. They were thrown right into the deep end, given briefs to work on from various agencies that would come by and say hello. What's your impression? We asked them this question. I want to ask you as well. What was your impression about the quality of the briefs that you saw? And I'm guessing that Hope, you probably had some sense of what a brief was, but Anna, maybe you didn't.
Well, we get taught that in a lot of depth. So that's the really good training at SCA. Before you do any creative or anything, you have a lot of lessons on strategy. So you learn the strategy at the same time as the creative. So you know when a brief is bad. And I think a lot of briefs are bad, which is why that's such important training. Because when a brief is bad, we can come in, see what they're trying to get at and actually rectify it ourselves. So I think that training was really good. And I think a lot of them were good briefs, but it's a mixed bag, that's for sure.
Were you brave enough to point out a bad brief to those who briefed you?
Not that brave,
no. No, but you don't have to point it out. You just have to produce creative work that's completely different to the brief to get your point across, Which obviously we don't do at our job now, but sometimes they give you a really interesting product and a really interesting thought, and then they're like, I'll do this on most of the briefs we get given, which I think at school probably needs to change. It like TikTok, that all your Gen Z do a TikTok brief, do a trend. And you're sort of like, okay, that's kind of really broad.
Yeah. You know, I have a very specific philosophy on that. Because I hear that a lot. I want a TikTok video. I mean, a TikTok brief. I want a design brief. I want a this brief. And I say, get rid of the adjectives, please. There's just a brief.
Yeah.
Because the brief is about an idea. It's not about an execution. The execution comes, well, this is open for debate, but the idea comes first and the tactic comes second. Real world doesn't always work that way. I understand that. And Henry and I've had this conversation a couple of times. But when you're in a learning environment, the way you are or were, that's the time to really understand. And when you got that first brief, when you both got together and you said, wow, this really is not a very good brief. Do you remember that moment, the first time you saw what you would call not such a good brief? Didn't have to be a bad brief, just not as good as you thought it could be. Was it pretty clear? Was it pretty easy to figure it out? Like, oh, this one isn't very good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, because you don't quite know what you're supposed to produce. More than anything else. You're sort of like, okay, so the deliverables on this, I don't know, like, do you know what you want us to say at all? I think one of the worst ones we got was, it was an agency had briefed us to come up with, I mean, we weren't even on the brief, but it was in the building, you know, because they sort of split us sometimes and put half the class on one brief from one agency and half the class on one brief from another agency. And one of them, it was a confectionery brand, and the brief was literally like, do something with AI, which is such a, here's a thing that's happening and here's our product and please make them, you know, talk. It was, I think a testament to the students on that brief, honestly, that any ideas were come up with at all.
It's interesting because there's a way to write a brief in which where you want the desired. So if the brand strategy is to use things that are happening in pop culture and the latest thing is that, then that puts it in a different context, right? Like, and you show examples of this is how we did it when this technology came out, and this is and this is what the brand stands for, and therefore, you know, it then makes sense. Like, I'm gonna date myself. There was a campaign that Pepsi had for many years, the Pepsi generation. And it was basically about pop culture and aligning itself with the latest, greatest pop star. Now, if I told you, oh, I just want a commercial with the latest, greatest pop star, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But if I tell you, well, Coca-Cola is about tradition and it's very conservative and it's Christmas and it's this, and we're about youth and pop culture, then it makes sense, right? But part of it is in the storytelling. But I don't doubt at all that this particular client just got a hair up their ass about AI because it was supposed to be the latest, greatest thing, which unfortunately is the way a lot of marketers, a lot of clients operate. They operate in this kind of fear mode of like, I'm being left behind. Like, Barbie is the latest thing. I have to do something with Barbie. Okay, great. Whatever. That's not really strategy.
I think as well, like half of the time that we were learning that lesson, it was because we were setting our own briefs that were bad as well. You know, we were setting, you remember our strategy mentor was basically like, you guys as a cohort, you're doing the thing where you pick your favorite problem and you attach, you know, a brand to it.
It's hard for as a student, isn't it? Because like you have like a student book that you have to make to get into your foot into the door in agencies. And like, where do you start? Like, it's really hard. You have to set yourself 10 problems to solve, really, and you've got to get them from somewhere. And when you're doing like loads of different projects, it's actually quite hard to set yourself loads of stuff when you've not like done the market research to discover where the actual problems are, and you're talking to people who, you know, who can help you. And it's quite hard as a student doing a whole project on your own.
100%. I mean,
yeah.
And as a strategist, I could appreciate that. And it's things that you get with experience. So you learn to realize that communications problems, like advertising problems, fall into some pretty standardized buckets, right? Like you might have a good product that people don't know about. You might have a good product that people have misperceptions about and think it's a bad product. You might have a good product that now you're releasing a kind of another SKU or a different flavor of that product. So they fall into these buckets, but without experience, it's kind of hard to visualize, like, okay, like what's going on here? What is really what are they trying to solve for? And that's why Howard and I, we're big advocates of that as practitioners in advertising, regardless of experience level, but especially when you're young, you need to be looking at advertising and trying to deconstruct it and say, what are they really trying to do here? What's the underlying thing? Like, why is that headline there? And what are they telling me? Like, looking at it at a deeper level than a consumer would look at it, looking at it as a practitioner and saying, oh, they're launching this thing. I know that brand. I don't know this product, but they're launching it and they're trying to get some of the halo from that onto this. Or this company just merged with this company and one has a good reputation and one has a bad reputation. And so they're trying to burnish the credentials of the acquired company. Whatever it is, you figure that out because you're looking at it in a way that consumers don't. And that goes back to what we started the conversation with, is like consumers see the world in a very superficial way and they see the advertising in a very superficial way. And my challenge to advertising practitioners is we can't just, when we check out of work at the end of the day, turn off our advertising hats. It's really useful to us to keep them on when we're being ourselves exposed to advertising.
Because we get hit by something like 7,000-8,000 messages every day. And there are so many of them, we're not even aware because we've turned our brains off. You know, a couple of thoughts popped into my head here as you're talking about figuring out the problem and the challenge as a young person in this industry. And I've told this story maybe once before. I remember when I was putting my book together, this was when I was not the detective. We had a conversation recently with Julian Cole, who's a strategist out of Portugal, and he teaches strategy all around the globe, very well regarded. And he said, there are two kinds of creative directors, and I write a brief differently for each kind of creative director. The detective is the one who is a strategically minded creative, and the artist is the one who really wants to just execute. And I always used to think of myself as the artist, and I've evolved into the detective because when I started out and I was trying to put my book together, I literally opened up the phone book back in the day when we still had a phone book. I'd literally go through the phone book and I would scroll down in the business section. I rolled down and I came across George's Accordion School. Oh, I got it. I can teach anyone to carry a tune. I wrote it down. There was my ad. That was a pun, but you know, and that's how I put my book. Well, okay, but that's how I put my book together. I didn't think, what's the problem? Who's he trying to talk to? What's his unique selling product? I didn't think about those things. I was just thinking like the artist. It took a period of time before I became more like Henry when I started asking those questions.
And I think that getting back to crap briefs, I think the instigation for you to get into learning about the briefs was you got so many crap briefs, you know, and it's really the reason I got into strategy was I seemed to be the only person at the small boutique agency that I was working at, and we didn't have a strategy department. I seemed to be the only person that would ask, why do they want to do that? Why do they want to do that? Like we need to make an ad for blah, 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 blah. Why do they want to and so I was like the pesky guy that always had the question, like, why do they want to do that? And it wasn't like, why do they want to do that? Don't do anything. It's why do that and not this? Or why have they already decided that that's the answer? And shouldn't we be the ones recommending what the answer is? It may very well be that they thought about it and were thoughtful and they've decided this is the way to go. But in 99% of cases, it wasn't. It was the ad industry has devolved into a transactional, tactical business. And in the golden age of advertising during the creative revolution that we talked about, it wasn't that way. The agencies were very much integrated into the client's thinking in terms of not just advertising, but of marketing the products and so forth. Clients didn't have big marketing departments. They knew how to manufacture whatever it was that they manufactured, and they had a sales force that would sell to wholesalers. They didn't know that much about consumers. Ad agencies knew about consumers, and the ad agency presidents would have golf and lunch with the client owners. And a lot of times they were privately held companies. So the ad agencies were a lot more integrated. And over time, there was a lot of things that happened in the industry. One of them was the split of media from creative, right? So a lot of the dollars that used to help fund the creativity of the agency now were no longer part of the creative agency. We had to do fee for service, and that basically made it very transactional. We became like lawyers billing by the hour rather than just saying, hey, you get this creative free for placing your considerable media budget with our agency, and we have the best creative available in the industry. So it's really a shame that we've become so tactical, but it also kind of created the need for strategy within the agency, because like I said, a lot of times clients just ask for stuff because it's the only thing they know, and it's not really
which is
really
why
thought out.
Yeah, which is why what Mark Lewis is doing and what you two are being trained in is so important, because now you're bringing a degree of thinking to your creative solutions that has been missing because of the transactional nature of what we've become. So, I mean, not to put any additional pressure on you, but we are expecting great things. We want you to help change the industry back, which I think is a great segue into where you are now. You finished a program in was it a year or 2-year program?
It
A
was
year,
10 months.
10 months
Yeah.
even. Yeah.
10 months. So you
Yeah.
went into placement, and you went as a team, which we would call an internship. Where did you work for your placement? Because then you have an announcement that you want to share with us, and we're excited to
yeah.
hear your announcement. So where were you interning, to use a term that our audience will understand?
Sure, yeah. We started off at VCCP, which there's a branch of, I believe, in America. And we loved it there. It was so much fun. But we ended up moving on to St. Luke's, which is it's like completely different, small agency versus, heaps and heaps and heaps of people at VCCP. And we really liked that as well. And then we ended up seeing, I have this thing, which Anna always laughs at me for doing this, but like I am constantly scrolling through LinkedIn. My dream's to be a LinkedIn influencer, obviously.
It's great
And I don't know, get some free stuff out of it. But yeah, the goal was obviously a job somewhere. And we happened to come across a job posting, which is actually, at a junior level is quite unusual. Because you would do placement and then get hired off the back of that. But we interviewed, had second interviews, and eventually got the job at an agency called Crow. So we're about to start in a couple of weeks. Which we're really excited.
That's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Yeah, well done. Good on you, as they say. Do they say that in New Zealand? Good on you?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Okay, good. That's wonderful. Do you have an account assignment or assignments, or that's not coming yet?
It's a pretty lean creative setup so they are part of like a larger network, but within the agency that we'll be working at, I think the creative department's about 6, I think they said. So we'll be on anything and everything they throw at us, which I think is one of the reasons why we wanted to go somewhere like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the largest agency I've worked for some big shops like, DDB and Ogilvy, and Team One had their 800-pound gorilla, as they say, was Lexus. And getting new clients to come in, the first question new clients would always say is, are you going to give us the junior teams, or are we going to have the same teams that work on Lexus? So if you have lots and lots of clients, you get to dabble your creative fingers in different kinds of creative thinking. If you only have one big client, then you're kind of stuck. So that's great. What is this a London-based shop?
Yeah.
Yes.
Covent Garden.
Okay. So what are your hopes and expectations in this new job? Where do you see yourselves going, and say, in the next year?
Hopefully nowhere in a year. Hopefully we can hold down a job for a year. That would be good. But I don't know. I mean, we only found out we got this job 2 days ago or something.
Oh,
So
wow, this is news.
not
It's
even
Brand new
real
thought
news.
that far in the
Yeah,
future.
we just told our current job, so it's really all happening. We weren't sure we'd be able to say, but yeah, it's all out in the open now. I think what we want from it probably is to get stuff made, move on from, I mean, we've had some amazing opportunities on placement. We've had some work out. It's been really cool. We've done radio, we've done press, we've got our first 48 sheets out. So really excited to go and find those.
There's nothing like the jolt that you get when you confronted with work that you did out in the real world.
Yeah.
It's one thing to see it, in the office and and for the client. I mean, the jolts you get are winning a pitch, selling an idea in, getting it, seeing it produced and and finished, particularly when you're talking about video ideas in that sense. But being confronted with your creative work in the real world, and then a high value placement, like in the US, the crowning achievement is a Super Bowl spot, right? And I've never had a piece of work that I worked on as a strategist in the Super Bowl, but I've had two in the NBA Finals, which is like the second biggest sporting event in the United States, and I've had one in the Oscar Awards, which is like the Super Bowl for women in the United States, or the entertainment Super Bowl, let's say. You definitely get a jolt when you see your work out there and say, I made that. And then there's the kind of letdown of, the fact is everything we do is so transient. Like, it's here today, it's gone tomorrow. It lives on in your book and in your memory, but it's not the kind of things. Very, very few ads penetrate the pop culture and become iconic. That's why we revere things like the Volkswagen Think Small ad, from 70 60 years ago, because they kind of stayed with the popular culture. But that is just rare, definitely rare. Most advertising is just frankly transient. I mentioned, stuff I worked on early on. Neither the agency nor the client exists anymore. There was no internet back then, so there's no chance that the stuff is online anywhere. The commercials were recorded on 1/4-inch magnetic tapes, which are probably in some landfill somewhere. So
So Mark Lewis, your dean at SCA, recommended that we have this conversation, and we're grateful that he made this recommendation. Do you stay in touch with him? Has he invited you to come back and talk to the cohorts now going through the program? Are you looking forward to that opportunity?
He hasn't asked us to come back and talk yet, but maybe that's.
Oh yeah, maybe one day.
He's worried what we'll say. Yeah, I mean, we don't obviously like talk to him every day or anything, but we have recently been in touch. We've been trying to get a little side hustle off the ground, providing opportunities for placement level creative teams to have freelance work, essentially with small businesses. And so, because he's such an entrepreneur, we were like, well, we only know one person, who can point us in the right direction, even if it's just business advice. So yeah, we stay in touch with him for things like that. Like when we have an idea, sometimes we'll bounce it off him and be like, is this terrible? And he'll be like, no. Well, in this case, he was like, actually not terrible, and here's someone who can help you with it. So now we're working on that with another company.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
If you could look back on your experience at SC, what would you say was the most important thing that you learned?
Probably resilience, to be honest. It's a tough course. It's really, really hard. Yeah, it works you really hard. Also, I think I realized it's not good to work yourself that hard that you can't sleep and stuff, and that you're not sleeping. So I'd probably take that from it as well. Don't work yourself too hard. But yeah, it's a tough course, and it definitely teaches you resilience, because I think there's a lot of like setbacks when it's quite an emotional process coming up with creative ideas. And if your idea doesn't get through, I think if you don't do SCA, you may feel it like as more of a personal thing, or you were just used to the setbacks, I think, going to SCA, because you just get told very straight, no, this is rubbish. But then on the flip side, when it's good, they mean it. So I think it teaches you resilience for probably quite a tough industry.
Yeah, and as someone who slept through the night for pretty much the entire course, I'd say don't be an art director.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, as a copywriter myself, I know how much more work is involved because it's the ideas and then you got to execute. Whereas for copywriters, I started off in a typewriter. I mean, so it's a little more work than a keyboard, but we're not talking breaking a sweat at all. Wow.
No, you've got your job after the copywriter's gone to bed. So
Well, sometimes I'd stay up late-ish in solidarity, but I
oh,
wasn't
yeah,
like adding much.
watching Netflix.
That's, that's a really interesting point. I kept taking these kinds of classes even when I was in my 30s, and I mean, I didn't get my first copywriter job until I was 30. And when I moved to Los Angeles 5 or 6 years into my career, I still took classes like this as a way to network and connect with the industry out here. And I had a partner who was considerably younger than I was, and he had this attitude where I cannot turn it off. I need to keep it on. And so when Anna, you said you had sleepless nights, that you were working too hard, I'm going to translate that into meaning you were thinking and you couldn't turn off your thinking.
I found that really difficult, really, really difficult. I just couldn't switch my brain off like a whole year. It was, yeah, just couldn't sleep.
That's an acquired skill. You have to learn to turn it off.
I've
Because
learned that now. Yeah.
yes, if you don't turn it off, you'll burn it out. And if you read a book by, and I've got it here on my shelf, it's a little skinny book. It's by James Webb Young, called A Technique for Producing Ideas. He identifies the 5 steps that every human brain goes through to come up with an idea. The most important one is walking away. You've got the input. You've started mulling over those ideas in your brain, and then you turn into mush and you need to walk away, which is the equivalent of saying, I need to go to sleep. I need to just go to bed, turn it off. And that's why you hear so many people say, I have my best ideas when I'm in the shower, when I'm walking the dog, when I'm doing the dishes, because you're now at the subconscious level and the brain is doing its thing in a non-conscious way. And if you don't learn to turn that off, you're gonna kill yourself. So that's an important skill to learn.
Yeah, it's a running joke between us whenever one of us has to go to the bathroom. We're always like, oh, have a good idea, you know.
So why don't we wrap this up by let me asking you, what is your advice to people like you, young people? Should they go into advertising? Is it worth it?
It's an amazing job and it's really, really fun. I'd say do your research into the challenges of getting into industry. You have to really want to do it to make it worthwhile. Because if you go to ad school, it's an expensive course, and then you're on placement on not very much money. We haven't been on placement that long compared to like how long it usually takes. So be prepared for that. And I'd say actually do it as young as you possibly can, to be honest. But that being said, it is like the most fun job out there. So definitely happy that, yeah, I've done it.
Yeah, I think I'd say like the number one mindset shift. I mean, I agree like with all it's really hard and you have to think about that because it is. And especially in London, it's really hard. And especially when you're coming from like a small country, you may not have as many opportunities. That was part of the reason why I moved. So it's worth thinking about, but that adds a layer. But I think like there is a mindset shift that you're required to undertake either while you're at ad school, if you back yourself enough to get there, or even before to just get yourself to apply, which is sort of giving yourself permission to say that you're a creative, to think of yourself as a creative. I think it's something I really struggled with. And it wasn't until I got to ad school and, you know, the expectations were if you had an idea that you would make it yourself or you would, you know, figure out a way to get it made. And that I really gave myself permission to think of myself in that way. And it's not like there's not like a hand of God that comes down and touches you and says you're a creative. It's actually you just thinking of yourself in a different way. And I think that's like, if you don't have that self-confidence, I guess, then it's going to be really hard. So,
Howard mentioned Julian Cole, and we had him on last week. And one of the topics that we spent a lot of time on was imposter syndrome. And it
Yeah.
sounds like there's a little bit of that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I think it's just natural as a young person. We've coined this expression. I don't know if you guys use it over there, but over here, adulting, right? Like you're
Yes.
you're going, we live in an unprecedented age, right? Where we get this very extended youth, where we get the opportunity to go to high school and then college and graduate school, and this extended adolescence where we don't have real responsibilities. And then suddenly it's like, yeah, I got to kind of start doing this thing. Like I gotta figure out where it is that I fit in the world. And at the beginning, it feels like you're acting, like you're, fake it till you make it, and it's, I think it, especially given the nature of what we do, which is delving into the area of ideas, right? Like if you
Mm.
if you fixed plumbing for a living, you'd have no doubt that you were a plumber. Like, this is what I do. I have my hands. I'm a mechanic. I fix cars. I'm a carpenter. I make things out of wood. Those things are very easy to conceptualize and to identify as being your trade or your profession. When you're in the world of ideas, I mean, and being a creative, that sounds very, far, you tell a civilian again, I'm a creative, they're going to look at you like, what the hell is this person talking about?
And we have a guy over here. We talked to him a year or so ago. His name is Paul Taylor, Mickey, I think is what he goes by, and he has a little thing he does on LinkedIn called Ad Week. The Ad
Yes.
Week,
Yeah. I love Ed Wickers.
WEAK. And he
Yeah.
just had a recent post where he showed an older couple that was like a grandma and grandpa. And the caption was breaking news. Grandparents don't quite understand why junior copywriter doesn't have an ad in the Super Bowl, right? Which is an example of this. The civilian world doesn't really get what we do.
Mm.
And I've seen other posts where he said, mother still doesn't understand what the copywriter does for a living. I get that. So my comment, I guess my closing comment is Mark Lewis has two more reasons to be really proud of what he's doing. And you are them. And we have high hopes for you to continue doing some smart thinking. We want to check in with you again in a year or so to see where you are, which is what we want to do with Ro and Jess and the two young people we've interviewed from over here. We want to follow your careers because we have high hopes for our industry. And we're looking at two of them right now. So Hope Whitehead and Anna Clayton, thank you so much for being
So
on the
much
Brief
fun,
Brothers.
Rob. Yeah, it's
No,
been fun.
thank you. Yeah, it's great.
I was truly, truly impressed with both Hope and Anna. They knew their stuff. I think they were wide-eyed, and when they went into this program, and they brought, even though Anna didn't quite know what she wanted to do, and I think she chose art direction as opposed to copywriting, whereas Hope really knew what she wanted because she had family background. But together they found themselves and made a great partnership, which I think is really, really important. And it just impressed me how clear-eyed they were about where they were going, what they were doing. What are some of your impressions?
No, I think you mentioned at the end of the conversation that, we have high hopes for the industry. There's so much discussion about the ad business dying, and we've had that conversation with Mark Ritz and the obsession within the trade press of this is dead, that's dead. And you see that bright young people are still going into our field. They're still coming up with great ideas. I'm kind of nervous for them because you get invested. You talk to these bright young students or recent graduates, and you get invested in them, and you're kind of reliving those early days. Like they're gonna have some hard times ahead, right? Like working those deadlines, trying to crack a brief, the pitches, the the personnel squabbles, all that stuff that ultimately faces any professional in any field, but that in advertising is like magnified, because of the timelines and the money pressures. So I'm kind of nervous for them, but at the same time, I think that they'll do just fine.
I agree. It's always easier to destroy than to create. And so when I hear the doomsayers talking about things like the end of our industry or the weaknesses of our industry, I say, yeah, whatever, just keep, your yak. I'll wait to see what happens. And almost all the time, the doomsayers are wrong. So Hope and Anna, I think, are two bright lights. Good stuff, Henry.
Good stuff, Howard.
He's Henry Gomez.
And he's Howard Eibach. And together, we're the Brief Brothers. Till next time, bye bye.